Gee guys, tonight we drift back thousands of years to moonlit Sumer, where the streets of Ur glow with oil lamps and the air is thick with the scent of baked bread, river mud and the distant echo of lyres. Tonight we slip quietly into those ancient alleyways, moving unnoticed among the traders, scribes and builders, to seek out the half-vanished footsteps of women, forgotten, overlooked, but never truly absent from history's grand parade. The walls are warm beneath your palm, the night alive with distant laughter, and you can almost sense someone peering out through a reed window, watching the world in secret. Let's be honest, most people never picture women when they imagine the world's first cities. Sumer gets credit for a lot. Writing, the wheeled taxis, sorry about that, but not usually for women who did more than fetch water or knead bread. Yet, if you squint past the glare of kings and warlords, you'll see them everywhere, in the temples, at the markets, counting coins, brewing beer, teaching songs, and sometimes rewriting the rules of the game. Blink, and you might miss the woman guiding a caravan by torchlight, or the priestess whose whispered blessing keeps the city's heart beating. And honestly, if you got on the wrong side of some of these ladies, you probably wouldn't survive a single Sumerian night, especially if you ate the last honey cake. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and your local time. I want to know who else is wandering ancient Mesopotamia with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a narrow lane between looming mud brick houses, your sandals squishing in clay that's still damp from yesterday's flood. Lanterns sway above doorways, marking homes both grand and humble, and you realise that every shadow might hold a story, one not recorded by kings but by mothers, daughters and sisters. Women's lives in Sumer were neither fully hidden nor always celebrated. They pulsed quietly in the corners of every public square and every sacred grove, holding families together, trading at market and sometimes wielding influence where men couldn't. The hum of the city is a living thing. You hear the splash of women fetching water at the city's well, their laughter drifting through the dusk. Up on the flat rooftops, families share a late meal, and you spot a woman weaving cloth by lamplight, her fingers moving with the ease of long practice. In the courtyard, a little girl skips stones while her grandmother braids her hair and tells her stories older than writing. Here, history isn't carved in monumental inscriptions, but passed along in lullabies, recipes, and clever advice about handling cranky husbands. Mainstream historical fact: Sumer was one of the world's earliest civilizations, famous for its city-states like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash. But while scribes recorded the deeds of kings and gods, the day-to-day lives of ordinary women are mostly tucked between the lines, revealed in legal codes, letters, and even old shopping lists baked in clay. Historians still argue whether Sumerian women were unusually empowered for their time, or simply better at working within the system than later societies gave them credit for. The records are frustratingly uneven. One moment, you'll find a queen presiding over a feast, the next, a law decreeing a woman's silence in public. You stroll past the ziggurat, its steps climbing toward the stars. There's a woman offering bread and fruit at a small roadside altar, her lips moving in silent prayer. Another passes with a bundle of reeds, her arms strong from hours in the fields. And always there's a sense of motion, of daily survival and adaptation. A quirky tidbit: some Sumerian taverns, yes, they had bars, were owned and run by women, who brewed beer for a straw no less, and settled disputes with a wit sharp enough to rival any scribe's stylus. Night deepens, and you follow the call of a distant lyre to a house where a group gathers for song and gossip. In the soft lamplight, women exchange news, arrange marriages, and plan tomorrow's tasks. An older woman tells a story about Inanna, the goddess who descended to the underworld, and came back stronger, her eyes flashing with the power of myth and memory. It's here, in the private sphere, that women's wisdom shapes the rhythm of the city, the same wisdom that quietly keeps the whole machine running, whether or not the scribes take note. You slip through the marketplace, past stalls piled high with dates, onions, and tiny carved amulets. A young woman haggles fiercely with a merchant over a bolt of dyed wool. Nearby, an old woman sells healing herbs, her table crowded with anxious clients and the occasional goat. And through it all, you sense that the boundaries between public and private, sacred and mundane, are much blurrier than you expected. The women of Sumer knew how to move between worlds, holding secrets and power in ways that defy easy description. Historians still puzzle over how much of this agency was real, and how much is wishful thinking on the part of modern scholars desperate to find forgotten heroines. Yet, the clues are everywhere, if you're willing to look past the broken tablets and missing inscriptions. The night air is thick with possibility, and you wonder how many stories have faded simply because no one thought to write them down. You end your slow stroll at the city walls, looking back at Ur shimmering in the dark. Somewhere behind those walls, women are dreaming, working, loving, arguing and surviving, sometimes in the spotlight, more often in the shade, but always, always present, holding up half the sky and half the history, even if the clay tablets forgot to say so. The city of Ur glows gently under the fading moon, and you press forward into the clay-scented hush of the ancient night, feeling the world stretch back even further before the bustling streets and market cries, before the ziggurats and temple hymns. Tonight you slip into the dreamscape of Sumer's origins, where myths are thick as river mist, and the roles of women are born from mud, water, and the daring whim of the gods. You tread the banks of the Euphrates, where the world is new and the reeds are so green they shimmer like jade in the dawn. Here the Sumerians spun stories of their beginnings, of gods shaping people from clay, of mothers birthing both rivers and rulers, of primordial daughters who could tame chaos with a glance. The wind sings with stories older than the oldest city. You almost expect the river to rise up and start explaining things itself, though, knowing the attitude of Sumerian water deities, it would probably just demand a proper offering and a little respect first. Mainstream historical fact, Sumerian mythology is among the oldest recorded, with female deities as central figures from the start. The powerful goddess Ninhursag, known as the mother of all living, was said to mould humans from clay, breathe life into them, and set them loose to tend the wild earth. Her myths blend the boundaries between divine and mortal women, both seen as shapers, nurturers, and sometimes rule-breakers in their own right. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on divine mothers translated to real-world respect for women, or if it mostly served to prop up royal lines, eager to claim a touch of goddess magic. You wander through the dawn, eavesdropping on creation. The gods, as Sumer tells it, are a complicated family, always in love, at war, borrowing each other's kitchenware, and prone to epic tantrums. Ninhursag isn't alone. There's Inanna, fierce and beautiful, the goddess of love and war, storms and harvests. Inanna's stories are wild, clever, and often hilarious. She tricks gods, seduces heroes, and even bullies her way into the underworld just to see what's hiding there. If you ever wonder where Sumerian women learned to make an entrance, just look to Inanna's thunderous arrival in the most inconvenient places. You pass the edge of a sleepy village where families still perform quiet dawn rituals, pouring milk for Ninhursag, leaving fresh bread on a rough altar, whispering prayers for healthy children and forgiving crops. The women here carry echoes of the goddesses in their gestures, hands gentle with babies, strong with farming tools,
quick to swat away a wayward goat or a lazy husband. A quirky tidbit. In some ancient spells, women invoked not just gods but the power of their own mothers and grandmothers, calling on the living and the dead as a single, unbroken chain. Nothing says "don't mess with me" quite like threatening someone with 3 generations of grumpy ancestors. You listen as 2 women sweep the yard, exchanging gossip and proverbs, many of them slyly referencing goddess deeds or ancient mischief. Don't borrow trouble unless you want to end up like Enki's garden. One laughs, hinting at a story where a god's lack of manners nearly brings chaos to all. The past is never really past here. It flows into every cup of water, every line of song, every worried glance at the weather. Historians still debate whether Sumer's reverence for female deities protected real women from everyday hardships, or if the goddess's wild freedoms were mostly reserved for the myths. Some point to high priestesses and royal women who wielded true power. Others note that, for many, life was a blend of ordinary struggle and extraordinary ritual. Hard work, yes, but always a sense of connection to something larger. As the sky brightens, you wander a path lined with broken pottery and wildflowers, feeling the presence of countless women whose names have been lost. The creation stories endure, retold at firesides, echoed in lullabies, inscribed on the city gates. Their lesson is both comforting and sharp. The world needs its shapers, its mothers, its daring daughters.
Every Sumerian woman, whether goddess or potter's wife, inherited a little of this power, the right to shape, to nurture, to challenge the world as she found it. You follow a group of children down to the water, where they make little figures from river clay, some tall, some squat, some with wild hair and lopsided smiles. The girls and boys giggle as they pretend to breathe life into their creations, then float them downstream with whispered wishes.
It's a tiny echo of the god's own game, a reminder that creation is an everyday act, not just the business of distant immortals. As the sun rises higher, you realize that every myth is a blueprint, one that Sumerian women, for all their struggles, followed and reshaped as they built the world anew with each passing day. You leave the riverbank with clay on your hands and a sense of awe, ready to chase the next story into the sunlit streets. You move into the golden light of early morning, where the great ziggurat casts its shadow over like a staircase to the stars. The city is waking, the hum of voices rising, and your steps lead you to the heart of Sumerian spiritual life. The temples, where women in shimmering linen move with the quiet authority of those who carry both power and peril on their shoulders. Tonight, you enter the world of Sumerian priestesses, not just holy women, but the living pulse of ritual politics and city life. You pause at the temple gates, catching the scent of incense, roasting grain, and the subtle aroma of oil lamps burning through the last of the night. This is where the great priestesses, the Intu and Naditu, rule with a different sort of scepter, blending prayer and politics, commerce and ceremony. Mainstream historical fact: in Sumer, high priestesses often held real clout, sometimes rivaling kings. Their rituals fed the gods, but their decisions fed the city, managing land, wealth and labourers on behalf of temples that were both banks and spiritual hubs. Inside the courtyard, the rhythm of daily worship thrums beneath your feet. You spot a group of priestesses in white reciting hymns as they pour libations onto carved altars. The head priestess, draped in lapis and gold, reviews tallies of barley and oil, her stylus tapping out orders for the temple staff. She's more than a caretaker of statues. She's a CEO, a judge, and sometimes the city's most powerful woman.
We can't help but wonder if Sumerian kings is a lost sleep, worrying what might happen if the priestesses went on strike. Sorry, no grain rations today, the goddess is on vacation. The temple isn't all grandeur. You watch younger novices sweeping floors and tending sacred fires, their laughter echoing through the corridors.
A quirky tidbit: to maintain ritual purity, some priestesses followed strict diets or elaborate bathing routines, with recipes for magical soap, and even holy eyeliner said to keep out evil spirits.
There's a rumor among scholars that the real reason temples were so clean was less about pleasing the gods and more about outdoing the neighbors' messiest houses.
You follow a procession to the innermost sanctuary where the goddess's statue sits in regal silence. Here, priestesses anoint the idol, offer food, and sing hymns so old the words sound like a river flowing backward in time. It's a performance, yes, but one with genuine stakes: the prosperity of the city, the health of the crops, the peace of the household. In times of crisis, everyone watched the priestesses. If they looked worried, the whole city held its breath. Historians still argue whether the high status of temple women reflected their independence, or just a privileged form of service. Some priestesses were royal daughters, set apart to ensure divine favour. Others came from powerful families eager to strengthen alliances. But evidence also hints at priestesses who started as orphans or outsiders, rising through wit and diligence to become some of the city's most influential figures. You slip into the archive chamber, where women bend over clay tablets, keeping records of offerings, debts, and land grants. It's not all numbers. There are hymns to Inanna, spells for fertility, letters to far-off relatives, even the occasional complaint about the temple cook's watery stew. Women's hands preserve not just the god's stories, but their own. A novice offers you a handful of dates and tells you of a festival soon to begin. Tonight, she whispers, we dance for Inanna until dawn. The goddess loves a good party. You can almost hear the drum beats already, the shuffle of feet, the quicksilver laughter as the lines between sacred and joyful blur. The priestesses lead, but the whole city follows, swept up in ritual and revelry that, for a moment, makes everyone forget their place. A quirky tidbit: some of the best Sumerian poetry survives in temple songs written by and for women. Lyrics that blend love, longing, and a healthy dose of teasing the gods. It turns out, even divine beings aren't immune to a little Sumerian side-eye. Historians still puzzle over the balance of power in these sacred spaces. Did the priestesses use ritual as a shield or as a sword? Were they free agents or carefully monitored by male clergy and city officials? There's no tidy answer, just 1,000 clay fragments, each telling a slightly different story.
As the sun climbs higher, the temple bells ring out, and you wander back into the city. Behind you, the songs and prayers continue, echoing down the centuries.
The priestesses remain part mystery, part memory, wholly vital. You realize that in Sumer, as in so many places, the women who stood at the altar also stood at the center of life itself. Powerful, practical, and sometimes just a little bit dangerous. You wander away from the temple just as the city's daily business flares to life, drawn by the commotion of the open market and the clatter of sandals on baked earth. The sun is well above the rooftops now, heating the bricks and turning every street into a winding, sun-soaked corridor of noise, colour, and trade.
Here you find the true backbone of Sumerian prosperity, not kings or priests, but the women working in the shadows and the light, weavers, brewers, and the unmistakable queens of the market stalls. You edge into the market, the air thick with the aroma of roasting onions, fresh dates, and the faint, yeasty tang of beer fermenting nearby.
Women of every age hawk their goods from reed mats and rough tables, woven baskets, bolts of dyed wool, pungent herbs, jugs of oil, and most prized of all, the best barley beer in the region. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian women were not just present in the city's economy, they were essential to it, often controlling the production and sale of cloth and beer, two cornerstones of everyday life and ritual. A group of women cluster around a massive loom, their fingers flying as they work coloured thread into patterns older than memory. The head weaver shouts instructions, her voice rising over the din. You watch her manage orders, collect payments, and settle a squabble between apprentices with the practiced calm of someone who's seen every trick. Nearby, another woman stirs a bubbling cauldron, steam curling upward, as she drops in herbs and chants a half-serious, half-mocking rhyme. Barley for Inanna, hops for the king, the rest for anyone thirsty and not too picky. There's a running joke among the beer sellers: if your batch tastes a little off, just say the goddess wanted it with character. Quirky tidbit: some of the oldest written recipes for beer and bread are Sumerian, many preserved on clay tablets signed by female brewers. Beer wasn't just a drink, it was daily nutrition, safe hydration, a religious offering, and sometimes a form of currency. In many families, women controlled the brewing starter, fiercely guarding the yeast that made each batch unique. Heaven help the husband who misplaced the house starter. He'd probably sleep with the donkeys for a week. You walk along rows of market stalls where women bargain with travelling merchants, weighing silver for spices, haggling over imported gems, or swapping gossip as they trade. A mother carries her youngest on her hip, while her older daughter tallies coins and counts out lentils. In another corner, a widow negotiates the price of dyed thread, her quick arithmetic the envy of every would-be merchant. The city's prosperity runs through their hands, flowing from home to market and back again. Historians still argue whether Sumerian women truly owned their businesses or operated under the names of their husbands and sons. Some contracts clearly name women as property owners, lenders, or partners in trade. Others seem to bury their contributions under layers of legal language. The evidence is tantalizing, but incomplete, like finding a fragment of a shopping list and guessing at the meal. Did women really run independent businesses? Or was it all behind-the-scenes work, masked by a patriarchal system on paper? You duck into a workshop at the edge of the market, where women twist reeds into baskets and shape clay into storage jars. The air is fragrant with damp earth and dried flowers. Here, you learn that every product tells a story, not just of labour and skill, but of relationships and reputation. A well-made basket means respect. A flawed one brings teasing, or worse, silence from your neighbours. There's a lively back and forth as women swap advice, recipes, and even a few curses for stubborn clay. But this, if it won't shape, threaten to throw it at your husband, one laughs. That always works for me. You pause at a stall where young women sell garlands of flowers, their laughter drawing in customers. They trade stories and songs as skillfully as they trade goods. At one end of the market, older women sit in the shade, spinning tales about the glory days when their mothers taught them to weave or brew, boasting of legendary batches and long-lost weaving patterns. Sometimes it seems half the market is held together by stories, little knots of memory, jokes, and shared experience passed down like family treasures. As the sun climbs, the market slows, women wiping sweat from their brows and dividing up what's left for the journey home. But business isn't over. There are deals to close, contracts to seal, and a few last-minute haggles to settle before the gates close for the heat of the afternoon. Historians still puzzle over whether Sumerian women's economic power translated to greater freedom, or if their hard work was simply expected and then overlooked. Was the marketplace an equalizer, or just another arena for subtle hierarchies? You realize the answer is tangled, woven into the fabric of daily life, visible if you know where to look, but always shifting in the play of shadow and light. As you leave the market, arms full of imaginary bread and a slightly lopsided basket, you catch one last glimpse of the weavers and brewers packing up for the day, faces flushed, voices proud, and laughter trailing behind them like a promise. The queens of the market may not have ruled from thrones, but without them, Sumer would have been a far poorer, quieter place. You slip into the cool shade of a narrow lane, leaving behind the bustling marketplace for the quieter rhythm of home. The scent of baking bread fades, replaced by the earthy aroma of damp clay walls and the sharp tang of fresh rushes underfoot. Here, in the maze of domestic courtyards and rooftop gardens, Sumerian women hold sway as matriarchs, managing households with skill, humour and a subtle brand of authority that leaves no doubt about who really keeps the city humming after the markets close. The morning sun streams in through a lattice window as you enter a family compound, stepping over a scrawny cat napping in the doorway. You spot a group of women sorting lentils at a low table, their hands moving in a choreography that's half work, half storytelling. One tells a joke about a neighbour's cooking, a gentle roast, not unlike the beans in the pot, and the others erupt in laughter. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Sumer, the family was the basic unit of society, and women's influence inside the home was as real as the city's stone walls. The house or was both fortress and stage, where women managed resources, arranged marriages, directed servants, and raised the next generation. You hear the slap of wet clay as a young wife repairs a leaky jug, the mother-in-law inspecting her work with a look that could curdle milk. Upstairs, an older woman directs the servants as they lay out a midday meal. Flaky barley bread, sliced cucumbers, bowls of honey and cheese. She ticks off a mental checklist, making sure nothing's forgotten, while her daughter-in-law quietly negotiates for an extra portion for her youngest child. The gentle power play is almost invisible, a constant dance of deference and assertion. A little boy scurries through the courtyard with a sheepish grin, clutching a broken amulet. He swears just fell off the shelf by itself. His grandmother gives him the classic "I wasn't born yesterday" look, and gently extracts the truth. A lesson in honesty delivered with a sly smile. Quirky tidbit: Sumerian children's names were sometimes chosen by their grandmothers, who believed that the right name brought luck, health, and maybe a dash more compliance at bedtime. You climb a ladder to the flat rooftop, where a woman kneels to spread out damp linen, humming an old song about love, drought, and the goddess Inanna's infamous temper. Down in the kitchen, two sisters argue over whether onions or garlic belong in the stew, while a third sneaks in a pinch of dried mint just to stir the pot, literally and figuratively. The home is a living laboratory of personalities, and women are the master experimenters. Historians still argue whether Sumerian women had real power in the household, or were bound by the expectations of fathers, husbands, and sons. Some tablets describe strict obedience, while others hint at a more complex, negotiated authority, especially for widows, elder mothers, and women from powerful families. The truth is somewhere in between. Sumerian matriarchs wielded the kind of quiet power that gets things done, using wit and wisdom more often than direct confrontation. You watch a group of women prepare for a wedding, braiding hair, embroidering veils, and reciting lines from ancient marriage songs. There's a sense of pride as they recall their own ceremonies, trading advice, and a few cautionary tales about in-laws. The bride's mother slips her a small clay token, pressed with a family symbol, a blessing and a secret reminder to stand your ground and never let your in-laws see you cry. There's a running joke that Sumerian mothers-in-law invented the art of the pointed silence. Lunch is served, and everyone gathers in the cool of the courtyard. Stories flow with the wine, the birth of a new calf, a near miss in the fields, the time someone's great aunt yelled at a city official until he gave her back her donkey. The mood is light but always layered with meaning, each story a lesson, a warning, or a bit of family strategy. Even in the small, daily dramas, women are both audience and playwright. A neighbour arrives to borrow some salt, sparking a 10-minute negotiation over whose garden produced the best cucumbers this year. The exchange is as much about gossip as groceries, with a few friendly barbs and a promise to return the favour soon. Or else, you see that these homegrown rivalries and alliances knit the city together in ways no king's decree ever could. Historians still puzzle over the written laws about women's rights and responsibilities, strict codes about inheritance, property and marriage contracts that seem on the surface to limit women's choices. But when you watch the household in action, you realize there's more negotiation, maneuvering and gentle rebellion than the scribes ever admitted. The real power flows in conversations, in clever compromises, and in the silent strength of women who know exactly when to bend and when to hold firm. As the heat of midday fades, you rest in the shade of a fig tree, listening to the gentle murmur of family life. The matriarchs are everywhere, watchful, wise, and quietly running the world from behind the scenes, one lentil at a time. You sense that while kings may have ruled Sumer's history, it was women who kept its heart beating and its households thriving. Generation after generation, the afternoon drifts softly, sunlight sliding along the narrow streets and turning the city's mud brick walls to gold. The city buzz is muted in the heat, but inside one particular home, there's a different kind of energy, the quiet intensity of learning. You follow the faint scratch of reed stylus on wet clay to a shaded corner, where a young girl sits cross-legged, eyes narrowed in concentration, as she presses cuneiform wedges into a small tablet. This is Sumer's answer to school, and tonight you find yourself peeking into the rare world of scribal girls, the lucky few who held a ticket to literacy and the key to a world usually closed to women. You kneel beside her, careful not to cast a shadow over the rows of wedge-shaped marks. She's copying lines of Sumerian wisdom, her tongue caught between her teeth, as she struggles to keep her script neat. Her teacher, a wiry old scribe with a beard like an overgrown paintbrush, grunts in approval. He knows the truth. The girl's mother paid a hefty sum for these lessons. Mainstream historical fact. While most Sumerian children, especially boys, were educated if their families could afford it, girls' access to literacy was much rarer. Daughters of priests, wealthy merchants, or high officials had the best chance of attending a tablet school, and only a select few ever learned to write fluently. Still, in a world where knowledge is power, even a little literacy goes a long way. The girl practices signing her name, dreams of someday, penning contracts, prayers, or even love letters. There's a thrill in watching her wrestle with grammar that's ancient, even to her, scribbling out mistakes, flipping her stylus with frustration, then shooting a triumphant grin at her grandmother when she finally gets it right. A quirky tidbit, some Sumerian school tablets have margin notes and little doodles, smiling faces, angry chickens, snarky commentary on teachers, evidence that even 4,000 years ago, students were students. If you thought passing notes in class was a modern invention, surprise, a bored Sumerian scribe beat you to it by a few millennia. You look around the classroom, a spare room really, filled with a handful of boys and just 2 girls. The teacher reads aloud a list of the gods, city names, and lines from legal codes. He quizzes the group, and while the boys roll their eyes, the girls sit up straight, eager to prove themselves. For them, every correct answer is a tiny rebellion, a way of saying, I belong here too. Historians still argue whether female literacy ever became common, or if the evidence mostly reflects a few exceptional families. Some claim temple women and priestesses needed reading and writing skills to manage property, keep ledgers, and perform rituals. Others suggest that most women picked up only the basics, just enough to sign a name or read a family letter. There's no clear answer, just tantalizing shards of tablets and scattered hints in ancient lists. As the lesson ends, we follow the girl back to her family's shop. She pauses to read the tally marks on a grain ledger, her mother raising an eyebrow in secret pride. Her little brother tugs her sleeve, demanding help with his sums, and she corrects him with a gentle but firm, "No, you've mixed up your barley and your beans again." At dinner, her father teases her about becoming the next royal scribe, but her mother winks and says, "Just make sure you don't write down anything about my cooking." You learn that for some girls, literacy was a lifeline, a way to step outside the narrow world of chores and gossip, to join the slow river of words that bound together city, temple. There's a running joke among Sumerian mothers: teach your daughter to write, and soon she'll be correcting your proverbs. Even the elders can't resist asking her to decipher a tricky line or two from the family's ancestral records. Historians still debate the real impact of educated women in Sumer. Did scribal girls grow up to change the world, or were their talents absorbed quietly into the family, the temple, the household? The records go silent. Tablets break, names fade, and most stories are left unfinished. But every once in a while, a woman's hand appears in the ancient archives, signing a contract, witnessing a deal, or even penning a prayer to Eninah or Ninhursag that survived the centuries. As the evening cools, you watch the girl tuck her tablet beneath her pillow, hoping for good luck on tomorrow's lesson. She falls asleep dreaming of words, her future as unwritten as the blank side of the next clay tablet. You realize that every wedge, every mark, every hidden doodle is a small act of defiance, proof that even in Sumer, learning could be a path to freedom, and that the story of women's minds, once begun, is never so easily erased. As dusk deepens and lamps flicker on in doorways, the city of takes on a gentler mood. The heat eases. Laughter floats from rooftop gatherings, and behind closed doors, hearts and hopes beat to rhythms far older than any written law. Tonight, you wander into the complicated, delightful, and sometimes heartbreaking world of Sumerian relationships, where marriages are arranged and dissolved by contract. But love sneaks in anyway, leaving behind the world's oldest poetry and a paper trail of squabbles that would make modern divorce lawyers blush. You duck under a reed awning and into a courtyard perfumed with blooming lilies. Inside, a family negotiates the terms of a daughter's upcoming marriage. The fathers haggle like market traders over dowries, gifts and promises goats, a bolt of blue wool, perhaps the return of a wayward cousin's donkey. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian marriages were business arrangements first, sealed by contracts written on clay tablets. The tablets spell out every detail, what the bride brings, what the groom owes, and crucially, what happens if things fall apart. The Sumerians loved a good contract almost as much as they loved a good meal. But for all the red tape, you catch flashes of tenderness, a shy glance between bride and groom, a whispered joke between mothers, a hopeful squeeze of the hand. The bride's mother gifts her a comb carved with protective symbols, murmuring, "For smooth hair and smooth days." Quirky tidbit: the Sumerians also invented some of the earliest known love poetry. In fact, the world's oldest love song, written for a royal wedding, simmers with longing and playful double entendres that would scandalize a chaperone even now. You follow the young couple as they stroll through a moonlit garden. He shyly quotes a line from a famous poem: "My beloved, your beauty is as sweet as fresh dates." She laughs and retorts with her own: "If only you would bring me honey cakes, I might believe you." The Sumerians left behind dozens of such poems, some steamy, others teasing, proof that even the most practical societies made space for the wild, ungovernable spark of love. Of course, love wasn't always enough. Sometimes couples parted ways amicably or not. Sumerian divorce too came with contracts and procedures. If things soured, the tablet spelled out who got what, whether the children stayed with their mother, and whether the in-laws owed a goat or two as an apology for the whole mess. Historians still argue whether women truly had a say in divorce or if it was mostly at the mercy of the men. Some records show women initiating separations, others portray them as bargaining chips in larger family squabbles. You're invited to a wedding feast where dancers whirl and the wine flows. The elders joke that marriage is like brewing beer. You hope for sweetness, but sometimes you get vinegar. The newlyweds exchange nervous smiles as they share the first bite of honey cake, and you realize the stakes. This is more than a contract. It's the start of a new household, the joining of two families, the weaving of fresh stories into the city's tapestry. A group of women gather by the well, trading stories of romance and rivalry. One boasts of having the cleverest husband. He can bargain a merchant out of his shoes. Another rolls her eyes and sighs. Mine wouldn't notice if I swapped the goat for a sheep. The conversation turns to children, names, futures, hopes, and you realize that behind the paperwork, marriage is about connection, survival, and sometimes genuine partnership. Quirky tidbit: love tokens in Sumer ranged from pretty beads to tiny carved figures, and in rare cases, miniature tablets with secret love notes. A favourite prank: slipping a fake marriage proposal tablet into a friend's food basket. The best ones were signed, from the goddess Inanna, accept or face her wrath. Historians still puzzle over the place of romance in a culture so keen on rules. Did love really flourish in the cracks of contract and tradition, or are we reading too much into a few clever poems? Did women ever truly choose their partners, or was it all decided by parents? The truth, as always, is messy. Plenty of marriages began with a handshake between fathers, but the stories that endure are the ones where hearts found a way to make their own rules. As the party winds down and lanterns are snuffed, you stroll beneath the stars, feeling the city's ancient pulse. Somewhere, a woman sings an old song about longing, her voice a thread in the dark. You sense that in every home, every heart, Sumerian women shaped their destinies, sometimes within the lines, sometimes in spite of them, but always with a flair for love, laughter, and a long game. The night settles cool and deep across the rooftops, but in the corner of a quiet lane, light spills from a low doorway where women gather in small groups, some tending infants, others mixing fragrant herbs, a few whispering prayers over steaming pots. This is Soma's other realm of influence, the half-shadowed world of midwives, healers, and magical women whose skills bridge the ordinary and the divine. Here, you follow their gentle hands and sharp wits through birth, illness, heartbreak. You step softly inside, careful not to disturb a mother as a midwife swaddles her newborn, murmuring blessings and a few very practical threats about sleeping through the night. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian midwives and healers were essential figures in family and community life, often wielding more authority in their own domain than any city official. With a toolkit of herbal knowledge, incantations, and hands-on wisdom passed down for generations, these women could turn the tide between life and death. A shelf is crowded with little clay jars. One holds wild mint, another dried myrtle, another a mysterious black paste rumoured to cure everything from fevers to stubborn husbands. There are tablets stacked nearby, inscribed with ancient recipes and spells. Quirky tidbit: one famous Sumerian medical text lists beer mixed with crushed frog as a supposed cure for toothache, proof that while Sumerian science was advanced, a little magical thinking and a lot of beer made the medicine go down easier. A young woman sits nearby, mixing herbs and singing a soft chant to Ninherzag, the great mother goddess and patron of healing. You notice how every gesture, the way she folds a leaf, the song's rhythm, echoes practices older than the city itself. Another woman inspects a collection of stones and amulets, each with a different story. One to ward off evil, one to ease childbirth, one to keep away the evil eye of jealous neighbours. Historians still argue whether Sumerian healing was more science or sorcery. Some tablets contain genuine medical observations and detailed knowledge of anatomy, while others are pure magic. A recipe for chasing away the ghost of fever might include offerings of garlic, recited charms, and the occasional chicken. Most Sumerians saw no contradiction. What mattered was that the treatment worked, and the healer's reputation was gold. You watch a healer tend to a small boy with a fever. She checks his pulse, feels his forehead, then brews a bitter-smelling tea, reciting a string of syllables meant to confuse the spirits causing illness. She cracks a smile and tells the boy he's too stubborn for any ghost to want, earning a weak laugh. Later, as the fever breaks, his mother thanks the healer with bread and a pinch of precious salt. In another corner, women gather for a birth, their faces taut with concentration. The midwife's commands are quick and sure. Move this, bring water, hush now. There's pride in her posture. She's seen 1,000 births and bears the scars to prove it. A quirky tidbit. Some Sumerian birth amulets were shaped like tiny goddesses or fat frogs, symbols of fertility and resilience. If a labour went long, women sang certain songs meant to call the baby out, and failing that, blamed the husband for having a lazy streak.
As dawn edges closer, you notice how women's healing work is both public and deeply private.
A healer visits a sick child, then slips next door to settle a marital quarrel or soothe a grieving widow with a story and a cup of sweet wine. The magic, you realise, isn't just in the herbs or chants, but in the confidence, kindness and sense of order these women bring to chaos. Historians still debate whether these women held official positions in temples, or if their authority was mostly recognised within their neighbourhoods and families. Some suggest that the best healers became local legends, remembered in family tales long after kings and priests were forgotten. Others note that magical women walked a fine line, respected in good times, blamed in bad, and always one step away from suspicion or envy. The first rooster crows, and you step outside as the world brightens. You carry with you the memory of sharp scents and soft voices, the sense that in Sumer, women's healing arts were more than a profession, they were a promise of hope. Whether scientist or sorceress, midwife or magician, these women shaped the fate of the city. One breath, one birth, one prayer at a time. Dawn's first light slips over the city walls, and the land beyond stirs, fields glitter with dew, water wheels creak into motion, and the green world wakes to the promise of another day's work. You follow the gentle chorus of women's voices to the edge of the city, where the endless tapestry of fields, canals, and palm groves is woven not just by men, but by generations of women, whose labour, rituals, and spiritual devotion nourished Sumer's fertile heart. This is where women shaped the very seasons, planters, harvesters, and keepers of the earth's ancient mysteries. You walk beside a line of women wading into a canal, their skirts hitched high, bare feet sinking in the mud as they sow rows of barley and emmer wheat. They trade jokes about who has the fastest hands and whose seed will sprout first. Mainstream historical fact: agriculture in Sumer was a communal affair, and women played vital roles at every stage, from planting and weeding to harvesting and grinding grain. Temple records list teams of female workers, often led by an experienced overseer, who managed everything from labour schedules to rationing bread and beer. As you wander through the groves, you notice women tending date palms, climbing ladders with baskets slung over their shoulders, laughing as they toss fruit down to younger siblings waiting below. The harvest is both hard work and a festival. There are songs for every step, and the old women claim that the best singers always fill their baskets first. A quirky tidbit: Sumerian farm workers often wore brightly coloured headscarves or strings of beads, both as decoration and as charms, to ensure good crops and ward off jealous spirits lurking in the furrows. You stop at the edge of a sprawling vegetable garden, where a woman kneels, turning the soil with her hands. She hums a tune dedicated to Nisaba, goddess of grain and writing, hoping for a harvest as bountiful as the temple's granaries. Nearby, another woman sprinkles water from a jug, her actions part irrigation, part ritual, a wordless prayer for rain when the skies are slow to answer. You realise that, in Sumer, there is little separation between the sacred and the ordinary. Every planting, is a blessing. Every harvest a thanks. Historians still argue whether women held official religious roles outside the city, serving as priestesses of field shrines or caretakers of sacred groves. Some tablets mention women leading rituals for fertility or acting as intermediaries between farmers and the divine. Others point to legal and administrative records where temple and palace authorities closely monitored labour, blurring the line between sacred service and everyday toil. You join a group gathered for the first harvest feast, where women prepare dishes of fresh greens, sweet dates and hearty flatbread. There's a contest to see who can grind grain the fastest. Winner gets first choice of honey. The laughter is loud, the teasing relentless, and everyone agrees that if you want something done right, ask the women who work the fields. The men roll their eyes and grumble good-naturedly, but no one dares challenge the women's claim. A young girl presents a basket of vegetables at a small household altar, placing a flower beside a figurine of the goddess. Her grandmother whispers, "Remember, without her blessing, even the richest soil gives nothing." The lesson lingers. Women's hands shape not just crops but fortunes, binding earth, family, and faith into a single living braid. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, women's agricultural songs doubled as coded messages, passing along news, gossip, or gentle warnings about lazy workers or wandering husbands. More than one harvest was saved by a timely song that spread word of a coming flood or a change in the weather. This is a beautiful and vivid scene you've painted, one that weaves together the simple, everyday actions of women with the deeper, complex dynamics of a society. The image of the women under the fig tree, sorting beans, chatting and working together, captures that essential rhythm of life, where community and labour intertwine so seamlessly. It's also fascinating to consider the historical debates about women's roles in ancient Sumer, especially their relationship to agriculture, land. It's easy to imagine that the resilience and creativity you describe would have been key to survival, even in the face of the unpredictable forces of nature. What do you think the way women managed these roles? Was it more about necessity and survival, or could there have been an underlying cultural reverence for the roles they played, particularly in agricultural societies? Or maybe both? You leave the fields as the sun climbs higher, the laughter and songs trailing behind you. The earth is marked by 1,000 footprints, some deep, some faint, all part of the story that women write in furrow, harvest and memory, season after season. You meander back through the winding lanes of passing under a battered city gate where guards watch the world slip from dusk into dark. The stone arch bears marks of centuries-old carvings, faded graffiti, and a faint pattern of tiny handprints at knee height. Here, just inside the city gates, you discover another hidden domain of Sumerian women, the law courts, the crossroads of justice, and the stage for dramas as tangled as any family feast. Tonight, you witness women not just as plaintiffs or witnesses, but occasionally, and surprisingly, as defenders, judges, and brokers of the city's complex codes. A crowd gathers beneath a canopied awning, murmuring as a scribe unrolls a fresh clay tablet. Two women stand at the centre, one stern and unyielding, the other with eyes flashing. Clearly, neither is here to lose an argument. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian legal codes, including the famed Ur-Nammu and later Hammurabi's code, recognized women's right to appear in court, file lawsuits, inherit property, and demand justice, at least on paper. In practice, court records show women haggling over dowries, defending their reputations, reclaiming debts, or seeking restitution for injury or insult. You watch as a woman presents her claim. A neighbour has let goats trample her garden, ruining months of work. She argues her case with precision, citing both the city's statutes and the goddess Nasoba's rules for proper neighbourly conduct. The defendant, no slouch herself, points out that the garden's wall was inadequate, and perhaps the real problem is poor fence maintenance. The crowd stifles laughter, and the judge, a bearded elder, ponders with the solemnity of someone who's already planning his lunch. Ultimately, the scribe records a compromise. Both parties must repair the fence together, and the goats are temporarily exiled to the riverbank. Historians still argue whether women's access to justice was real empowerment, or more symbolic than practical. Some cases end in genuine restitution. Others reveal bias, manipulation, or the silent hand of powerful male relatives. Yet, the mere presence of women at the city gates, arguing, witnessing, and sometimes winning, is a testament to their agency within a rigid system. Quirky tidbit: in one set of surviving records, a notorious serial litigant named Amat Mamo appeared so frequently in court over everything from debts to insults to the ownership of a prized goose that later scribes began drawing little exasperated faces next to her name. Court clerks everywhere, it seems, developed their own language for "here we go again." You're invited to watch a more formal proceeding, a widow and her daughter disputing an inheritance with distant cousins. The judge listens as the women cite tablet after tablet, referencing years of service, lost property, and most importantly, a sacred family amulet, supposedly hidden inside a broken clay jar. There's more than a whiff of drama here. The court is both law and theatre, with an audience eager for entertainment. In the end, the judge, perhaps swayed by the daughter's calm retelling, awards the land to the women, sending the cousins home to mutter about the magic of female persuasion. You stroll along the wall, past a row of low benches where women wait their turn, some seeking child support, others negotiating for market stall space, still others lodging complaints against lazy sons-in-law. A few elderly women lean in, muttering that the old days were better when arguments were settled over bread and beer, not a pile of tablets. The past, you realise, is always one part nostalgia, two parts selective memory. Historians still debate whether women ever served as formal judges. Some temple records hint at priestesses mediating disputes. Others suggest that, in certain periods, elder women with deep community respect acted as unofficial arbiters. The evidence is scarce, but the stories persist enough to hint that in a world ruled by law and custom, women found space to shape justice, whether through official power or behind-the-scenes savvy. Quirky tidbit: some laws were oddly specific, like the infamous if a woman throws a jug and it misses her husband but hits the neighbour, both must pay a fine and host a peace dinner. You could almost hear the crowd's laughter as the scribe records another tale for the ages. As dusk deepens and the crowds disperse, you pass one last courtroom drama. Two sisters, arms crossed, haggling over who must clean up after the family goat. Their mother presides, a mock judge with a wooden spoon as her gavel. The city gates echo with laughter, and you sense that justice, like everything in Sumer, is a dance between law and life, woven with wit, patience, and the occasional nudge from a clever woman. The moon floats high over Ur, its cool light spilling into courtyards and along the broad, tiled streets. The city grows quieter, but you catch the pulse of celebration building in the air. A soft drumbeat, a faint melody, a ripple of voices rehearsing for the night's festivities. You follow the music to the temple plaza, where women clad in swirling linen and heavy with jewelry gather to tune lyres, practice dances, and prepare offerings for the gods and for each other. Tonight, you slip into the world of Sumerian musicians, dancers and festival leaders, where women's artistry turns the city into a living stage. You pause beneath a fig tree as a group of girls, faces painted and hair twined with reeds, rehearse a circle dance. Their teacher, an older woman with sharp eyes and nimble feet, calls out steps and claps a steady rhythm. If you forget the next move, just smile bigger and pretend it's on purpose, she jokes, setting the girls giggling. Mainstream historical fact. Women in Sumer were central to musical and ritual life, performing in both religious and civic festivals as singers, instrumentalists, and dancers. Some became professionals, serving as temple musicians or court entertainers, respected for their skill and creativity. You watch as a musician tunes a silver lyre, her fingers flying across the strings. Her music floats over the plaza, softening the harsh angles of the city and drawing an eager audience of both adults and children. There's a thrill to her playing, playful, bold, and laced with ancient tunes that everyone seems to know by heart. The next song begins, and another woman strikes a hand drum, her rhythm quickening until everyone's feet are tapping along. The plaza shimmers with sound and movement. Quirky tidbit. The world's oldest known written music comes from ancient Sumer, a clay tablet with cuneiform notation for a hymn dedicated to Nikal, the goddess of orchards. Some musicians claim they can still play it, though the rest admit, if it sounds off, just blame the god who invented tuning. It's proof that Sumerians took music seriously enough to argue over the best way to sing an ode to a fig tree. You drift through the crowd, noting how the women move with confidence, weaving between groups to organize the festival's logistics, lighting torches, handing out ceremonial bread, smoothing disputes about costume colors, and herding children toward their places. A tall woman with a carved flute calls for silence. She leads the opening procession, her flute notes looping through the crowd like a breeze, calling everyone to order. Historians still argue whether these female performers held formal titles, or if their influence was mainly informal and event-based. Some evidence points to professional guilds of women musicians and dancers, supported by temples or wealthy patrons. Others believe that most festival roles rotated, shared among families and neighborhoods, with certain dynasties producing generations of renowned singers or storytellers. No one doubts the power of performance. Sumerian songs and dances stitched communities together, invoked blessings, and when necessary offered comic relief. As the festival reaches its peak, you join a semicircle of onlookers. A line of women steps forward to recite hymns, some solemn, some slyly humorous, some sprinkled with inside jokes about forgetful priests or lazy husbands. A chorus of children chimes in with a song about the moon's love affair with the river, their high voices ringing clear into the night. Quirky tidbit, during some festivals, the queen of the feast, always a woman, was chosen to preside over the meal, direct the singing, and even play matchmaker for the city's bachelors and bachelorettes. These roles sometimes sparked more intrigue and drama than the rest of the celebration combined. Historians still debate whether women's participation in public performance was an act of empowerment or simply another duty wrapped in ritual. Did music and dance offer freedom, or were they tightly bound by social expectations and temple rules? The truth, as always, lies in the faces of the women, some solemn, some sly, all radiant with pride in their art. You step back as the festival winds down, the crowd lingering to share food and gossip beneath the stars. Musicians pack up their instruments, dancers stretch weary legs, and everyone hums a snatch of song on their way home. You realize that in Sumer, women's artistry transformed even the darkest night into a celebration, their music and movement echoing long after the drums fall silent. Night has deepened into that strange timeless quiet when even the city's stray dogs seem to sleep. You find yourself wandering toward the city's edges, past the bright lights of the plazas, into dimmer streets and shabbier courtyards. Here, beneath the pale shimmer of the stars, you encounter another layer of Sumerian womanhood, slaves, servants, and citizens of uncertain status, each living their own version of resilience and quiet rebellion. You sense the ache and grit of a world where every tier of society shaped and was shaped by the women who moved through it. You watch as a group of women sweep the threshold of a wealthy home, careful not to miss a single grain of sand. Their chatter is low, and their movements quick and practical. These are servants, some born free, some sold into bondage, some caught in debt, others captured in war and brought from distant lands. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian society was deeply stratified, and the lowest rungs were occupied by slaves and indentured servants, many of them women. Legal codes detail their rights and frequent lack thereof, their obligations, and the thin margin of autonomy allowed to those who did society's hardest work. A servant girl ducks into the shadows as her mistress passes, clutching a tiny clay charm. A lucky token meant to bring her good dreams and, maybe, a kinder day tomorrow. Quirky tidbit: some families, desperate to escape debt slavery, wrote elaborate, half-comical petitions to the gods on small tablets, hoping divine intervention might persuade a creditor to accidentally lose the paperwork. The gods, it seems, had mixed success as bureaucrats.
You trail a laundry cart down a winding alley, the wheels squeaking under heaps of tunics and linens. Women trade news as they work. Whose master is strict, who's had a baby, who managed to save a little barley for herself. There's rivalry, friendship, and even a kind of pride. The best washerwoman can get, even the ziggurat's mud stains out.
Occasionally, a kind mistress slips her servant a slice of honey bread, or a kind word. More often, the rules are strict, the hours long, and the rewards slim. Historians still argue whether Sumerian slavery was mostly household, and thus relatively mild, or if even in the home, abuse and exploitation were common. Some tablets tell stories of loyalty, mutual dependence, or even affection between mistress and servant. Others list punishments, runaway slaves, and cruel owners who faced little consequence for their actions. The reality, like the city itself, is complicated. No two households were ever quite alike. You notice too how status could be surprisingly fluid. Some slaves earned their freedom after years of loyal service, even rising to own property or businesses. Freeborn women could fall into slavery through war, famine, or a husband's debts. Occasionally a woman's skills, midwifery, music, weaving, or healing, brought her enough respect to blur the boundaries between servant and citizen, at least in daily life. Quirky tidbit: there's evidence of Sumerian women staging small acts of rebellion, hiding food, sabotaging bad jobs, passing coded notes to family, or running away during festival nights when crowds made pursuit difficult. Sometimes, an entire household of slaves coordinated a day of mysterious illnesses, all too tired to work, forcing the master to fetch water and make his own bread. The gods must be punishing us, the mistress would mutter, never quite able to prove otherwise. You wander through the workers' quarter, where families crowd into narrow rooms, and the air smells of stew, sweat, and sometimes hope. Women gather by a single lamp, teaching their children songs and old stories. Even the lowest status woman carries a private world of pride. A hand-stitched dress, a well-kept amulet, a secret savings hidden beneath the floor. You realize that in Sumer, survival itself was a form of quiet defiance, finding meaning in scraps and dignity in whatever work the world allowed. Historians still puzzle over whether upward mobility was real or just an illusion. Did enough slaves and servants ever truly rise? The evidence is fragmentary. A handful of lucky names recorded in contracts or letters. A few stories of rags to riches. Many more of quiet lives lived and forgotten. Yet for every woman who remained a servant, there were others who carved out new lives, sometimes within a single lifetime, sometimes over generations. As the night wanes and the city's elite sleep soundly, You pause at a darkened doorway where a servant girl traces a prayer into the dust, with her finger whispering to the gods of freedom, kindness, and a better tomorrow. She glances up, half smiling. Just for a moment, you see not a slave, but a whole world of possibility in her eyes. The first hints of dawn stain the sky, turning the mud brick walls a rosy gold as you find yourself drawn to the city gates once more. But this time the world feels wider, a crossroads of tongues and customs, laden donkeys and anxious fathers, royal guards and women in elaborate finery. Tonight you trace the steps of Sumer's foreign brides and diplomatic daughters, whose marriages bridged rivers, kingdoms, and sometimes even enemies, weaving the city into a tapestry of alliances as fragile as it was powerful.
You pause at the main gate, where a cluster of travellers waits to enter, some carrying tribute, others seeking trade, and a few accompanied by women veiled in fine linen, their eyes bright with the wary hope of those about to step into new lives.
Mainstream historical facts. Throughout Sumer's history, marriages among the elite were strategic affairs, and royal daughters, priestesses, and wealthy merchant women were often sent as brides to seal treaties or create bonds between city-states and faraway lands. The air is thick with anticipation as a young woman says goodbye to her family, her hands trembling only a little, as she boards a carriage bound for a distant court. Her mother presses a small idol into her palm, a household god, both blessing and secret link to home. Behind her, an older sister whispers advice, smile at the right jokes, don't let them see you cry, and remember, everyone loves honey cakes. Quirky tidbit: Sumerian wedding processions for noble women could be elaborate affairs, complete with music, gifts, and sometimes even a parade of exotic animals, just to show off a family's wealth, and, one suspects, to distract the bride from any last-minute doubts. You walk with the procession as it winds through Ur's crowded streets. Onlookers gossip about the match. Will the alliance last? Is the dowry enough? Will the new bride win favour in her husband's city, or become a pawn in endless squabbles over land and tribute? The risks are real. Some brides became queens, others vanished into the footnotes of court intrigue, their voices only occasionally surfacing in letters or prayers for home. Historians still argue whether foreign brides wielded real power or served mainly as diplomatic tokens. Some clay tablets preserve the words of women who advised rulers, arranged marriages for their children, or even negotiated disputes between cities. Others show women caught between cultures expected to adopt their new family's gods, rituals, and dress, sometimes forbidden to speak their mother tongue. Yet the evidence suggests many found subtle ways to keep a part of their old world alive. You watch a foreign bride's first days in her new home. She learns to navigate unfamiliar customs, to charm her new in-laws, and to send carefully coded letters back to her family. All is well, she writes, except for the soup, which needs more garlic. There's laughter and tears as she teaches her new sisters the lullabies of her childhood and picks up a few of their sharpest proverbs. Sometimes these women became cultural bridges, introducing new styles, foods, or religious practices to their adopted cities. Quirky tidbit: some alliances were cemented with lavish bride gifts, carts of silver, fine wool, and herds of fat-tailed sheep. In return, the bride's family often demanded solemn oaths, and in a few cases, built miniature temples in her honor to ensure her well-being far from home. If things soured, there was always the threat, sometimes more real than empty, that a powerful family might come calling, armies in tow. You're invited to a celebration, a feast in honor of a new alliance. There's music and dancing, speeches in 3 languages, and enough wine to make even the most skeptical uncle raise a toast. Elders share stories of famous diplomatic daughters, one who saved her city with clever negotiation, another whose beauty started a minor war, and a third who, rumor has it, kept two kings dancing to her tune for years. Historians still puzzle over the fates of these women. Did they become true power brokers, or were their triumphs mostly confined to the shadows? How many managed to return home, and how many found ways to turn exile into opportunity? The tablets are silent on most details, but local legends fill in the blanks. Stories of brave, witty, and sometimes stubborn women who turned marriages of state into something more lasting than any treaty. As the sun rises higher and the world stirs into busy daytime, you watch a new bride slip a tiny carved amulet into her dress, straightening her back before stepping into a room full of strangers. For a moment you sense the bravery required to leave everything known behind, and the quiet pride in forging a new path, one foot in two worlds determined to make both of them her own. The heat of day shimmers over Ur's rooftops, but you're not seeking shade. Instead, you drift toward the city's edge, drawn by stories of women whose courage and strength broke every expectation. Women who, in times of war or upheaval, took up arms, defended their homes, or stepped into roles usually reserved for men. This is the realm of warriors and defenders, where fact blurs into legend, and the truth is as layered as the dust on the old city walls. You arrive at a battered section of the ramparts, where soldiers sharpen bronze blades and swap stories of past battles. To your surprise, you hear one guard boast, "My grandmother once held this gate through 3 days of siege." The other men nod, and a few even look impressed.
Mainstream historical fact. While most Sumerian armies were led and manned by men, there are scattered hints in texts and oral tradition that women, especially in desperate times, fought, planned defences, or acted as scouts, spies, or medics.
You peer through a break in the wall, imagining what it must have been like when enemies threatened, the air thick with fear and the scent of oil and singed reed. In one corner, an old woman trains a pair of teenage girls in the art of slinging stones, her voice sharp, her aim sharper. She winks at you, muttering, "If the men run, someone's got to keep the city standing." Quirky tidbit. Some Sumerian city laments mention women leading last-ditch efforts to defend temple treasuries or organising bucket lines to put out fires during sieges. One old poem even claims a group of priestesses disguised themselves as men and slipped past enemy lines to deliver food to trapped soldiers. History or heroic exaggeration? It's hard to say. Historians still argue whether Sumerian women ever served as full-fledged soldiers, or whether the tales of shield maidens were mostly symbolic, representing the city's spirit more than battlefield reality. The surviving records focus on generals and kings, but the margins sometimes reveal women organising supply lines, tending the wounded, or even standing in the ranks during desperate last stands. The debate continues. Are these scattered hints the truth, or just stories told to comfort a city licking its wounds? You sit by the city gate as the old guard tells of his grandmother's defence. She rallied neighbours, coordinated with priests, and made sure no child went hungry. Another woman, he claims, ran messages between commanders, slipping through enemy lines disguised as a beggar. There's a certain pride in these tales, even if they've grown taller. With every retelling, they offer a glimpse of real grit and cleverness. You watch a mother teach her daughter how to tie a sling, using river pebbles for practice. "If you can hit the laundry basket, you can hit a bandit," she laughs. The girl's arms are thin, but strong. Their eyes sparkle with determination. In the background, women reinforce the city's reed walls with thick mud, singing songs about Inanna, the goddess of both love and war. Quirky tidbit: Sumerian legal codes sometimes refer to women of the city who were responsible for defending certain neighborhoods during crises. If a section fell, it was the women who faced fines or had to swear oaths to do better next time. It seems even ancient bureaucrats knew who really kept things running. Historians still puzzle over why so many stories of female defenders survived when other details of women's lives faded into silence. Some suggest these tales were meant to inspire courage in future generations. Others believe they reflect an older, more egalitarian past, gradually erased by the march of empire and kingship. Either way, you sense that these legends are less about battlefield battlery and more about resilience, resourcefulness, and the deep love women held for their families and city. As dusk cools the air, you stand on the rampart and look out over the plain. Somewhere in the distance, a mother calls her children in for supper, a soft, everyday sound that in its own way is as powerful as any war cry. In Sumer, as in every age, it's often the quiet defenders whose legacy outlasts the thunder of swords. You leave the noisy bustle of the walls behind, drawn now to quieter spaces, archives, libraries, the dusty corners of old temples where clay tablets are stacked in precarious towers, some so ancient their writing has almost faded away. Here the silence is thick, not just with the hush of scholarship, but with the absence of so many voices, especially those of women. You wander the shadowy aisles, tracing your fingers across the baked earth records, searching for clues, names, and stories of Sumerian women, lost to history and the scribe's stylus. The room is musty, the light slanting in through narrow windows, illuminating rows of clay tablets, legal contracts, hymnals, tax ledgers, prayers and lists of everything from livestock to gods. You pause at a tablet detailing a land sale. Men's names dominate, but here and there a woman's name appears, often as witness, sometimes as buyer, rarely as scribe.
Mainstream historical fact. While Sumerian civilization was famously literate, the vast majority of surviving records were written by and for men. Women's voices are rare, often fleeting, hidden behind patronymics, abbreviated in legal formulas, or merged into collective terms like wives and daughters.
A scholar shuffles past, balancing a tablet and muttering about lost years and untranslatable curses. You overhear him complain that women are everywhere in the background, mothers, sisters, daughters, that almost never get the starring role. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate act of erasure, a reflection of reality, or simply a quirk of what got written down and what didn't. Did Sumerian women speak their minds freely, only for their words to vanish with the crumbling of clay? Or were their lives always meant to be footnotes in someone else's story? Quirky tidbits. Occasionally you find a tablet inscribed with a curse on anyone who tries to erase the record, proof that even ancient scribes worried about the fragility of memory. Some scholars believe that the most vibrant women's stories survived only as oral tales, jokes, lullabies, proverbs passed from mother to daughter, and never meant for the rigid formality of clay. You examine a household account tablet, where lists of wool, beer and bread are broken only by a brief note, given to the weaver's daughter. That daughter's name is lost, as are her thoughts, her complaints about the workload, and whether she ever dreamed of being more than a line item. In another archive you see evidence of priestesses who wrote letters or led rituals, but the majority of names belong to kings, temple stewards, or bureaucrats eager to document taxes and deliveries, not daily life. Historians still debate whether more records of women's lives once existed and simply decayed, or if literacy itself was mostly a male preserve. Some believe that women, particularly priestesses or wealthy daughters, kept personal tablets or diaries now lost to time. Others suggest women's history survived in places the scribes never thought to look, spindle whorls etched with tiny notes, beads traded for gossip, even graffiti carved in the walls of granaries or bathhouses. A scribe, noticing your interest, points out a rare tablet, a marriage contract, signed by a woman who witnessed with her own hand. Her signature, stylized and careful, stands out amid the dense script, a spark of individuality flickering across the millennia. The scribe shrugs. Not many like her, but they're there, if you're patient.
Quirky tidbit, some Sumerian school tablets contain practice signatures in the margins, a few of them distinctly feminine in style. Scholars like to imagine young girls sneaking into the scribal school at night, practicing their names by lamplight before the boys arrived.
historians still lament the silence of the records. Is it possible to reconstruct women's daily realities from lists and laws alone? Or is the real story of Sumerian women found in the gaps? The recipes unrecorded, the songs half remembered, the rumours that never made it to clay.
The debate is ongoing, but the urge to fill the silence, to speak the names of forgotten daughters, never fades.
You step back from the archives, squinting into the sunlit street. Everywhere you look, you see women shaping the city, weaving, teaching, arguing, singing, loving, and leading. Their voices may be faint in the records, but their presence is everywhere, woven into the very clay of Sumer, waiting for someone to listen closely and hear the echo of their stories. As afternoon softens into golden haze, you meander through the courtyards and shaded gardens behind Sumer's tall walls. Laughter echoes from a gathering of older women, seated beneath a fig tree, their faces lined with sun and years. Eyes bright with the sort of confidence that only comes from having seen it all twice. Here, you discover the world of grandmothers and aging matriarchs, women who, though often underestimated by the young and the powerful, hold a quiet command over memory, ritual, and the future of every Sumerian household. You sit among them, savouring the tart sweetness of dried dates and the comforting drone of their conversation. Mainstream historical fact. In Sumerian families, older women, especially grandmothers, often wielded significant authority in domestic matters, from managing household stores to resolving disputes, choosing names for newborns, and even serving as arbiters in family arguments. Their wisdom was valued, their stories were law, and their presence shaped traditions passed down through generations. The grandmother plats her granddaughter's hair, reciting an old proverb about patient fingers and stubborn knots. Another woman snorts. If only my son's wife listened to advice as well as she braids her hair. The rest cackle, and the joke is passed around like a plate of fresh bread. Quirky tidbit. In some Sumerian families, grandmothers chose the most auspicious day for important events. Weddings, contracts, even planting seeds, consulting old calendars, weather signs, and sometimes a secret recipe for reading sheep bones. You watch as an elderly woman oversees the preparation of a ritual meal, barking orders with a voice that brooks no argument. Younger women hover, seeking her approval for the spice blend and the proper cut of lamb. Her word settles every debate. Later, she draws the children in for a bedtime tale. Not a king's adventure, but the memory of her own childhood. The flood that swept through Ur. The time her mother bargained with a fishmonger for a rare fruit. The sorrow of losing a brother in a distant war. Historians still argue whether the high status of grandmothers was universal or varied by family and era. Some evidence suggests that matrilineal influence persisted even when formal power shifted to men. Others propose that, as in so many societies, older women's authority was strongest behind closed doors and faded in public or legal affairs. Either way, their legacy is everywhere in the rhythms of family life. As dusk deepens, you hear women trading stories that blend fact, legend, and a healthy amount of sarcasm. If men did the washing, there would be mud in the soup, and soup in the laundry. One another shares a recipe for ancestor bread, a dense loaf baked only once a year to honour the dead. Each memory is a thread in the city's living tapestry, and it's the grandmothers who keep a pattern strong. Quirky tidbit. Sumerian families often kept ancestor figurines in their homes, and it was usually the eldest woman who tended these little altars, lighting lamps, singing songs, on special nights, offering scraps of food or a drop of wine to keep the spirits happy, and hopefully out of the kitchen. You notice how the older women serve as peacekeepers, gently nudging bickering grandchildren back into line, or offering comfort to a new widow with a simple touch on the shoulder, and a promise that nothing is ever truly lost if someone remembers.
Even the menfolk know better than to question a grandmother's judgment on matters of kinship or tradition. Historians still puzzle over how these matriarchs balanced public invisibility with private authority. Did their wisdom subtly steer the family's fate? Whether the keepers of secret histories, never meant for male ears, guardians of recipes, rituals, and whispered curses alike.
The clay tablets say little, but the living memory of Sumer runs thick with the influence of its eldest women. As evening settles and the first stars appear, you feel the calm strength of the matriarchs all around you. Their words linger in the air, sometimes sharp, sometimes sweet, always steadying. You realize that in Sumer, as in so many places, it's often the grandmothers who have the last word, the last laugh, and the last story, until a new generation gathers, hungry to hear it all again. The sky deepens into velvet, punctuated by flickering oil lamps and the distant sparkle of jewels. Laughter and music echo down the street as you wander toward a house alive with the rustle of silk and the bright clatter of bangles. Here women gather for an evening of adornment and self-expression, a world away from the fields and hearth. Tonight, you're swept into the realm of Sumerian fashionistas. Women who, with clever fingers and playful invention, turned beauty, style, and status into both a celebration and a statement. You slip past the doorway, catching your breath at the sight of women draped in sheer linen, their hair piled high and threaded with beads, gold wire, and tiny seashells. Mainstream historical fact: Sumerian women, especially those from affluent families, were famed for their elaborate personal adornment, braided hair, layered necklaces, striking kohl-lined eyes, and even lipstick made from crushed minerals. Clothing style and jewellery weren't just for vanity, they signalled social status, family heritage, and sometimes even religious devotion. A group of young women sit cross-legged around a box of ornaments, debating the relative merits of lapis lazuli versus carnelian, giggling over who can balance the most rings on her fingers without dropping any into the bread dough. A matronly aunt offers advice, sometimes helpful, sometimes a well-placed joke about not outshining the goddess, Inanna herself, unless you're ready for a little divine mischief. Quirky tidbit: Sumerian women were trendsetters in their time, pioneering cosmetics recipes that included everything from scented oils to eyebrow wiggles. If you ever feel your eyebrows are unruly, just remember that ancient beauty hacks included sheep fat and crushed charcoal. As the group prepares for a temple festival, an older woman demonstrates the art of hair braiding, a process that takes hours, and according to her, at least 3 cousins and a small bribe for good luck. Another applies dark kohl around her eyes, explaining that the look is both fashionable and believed to ward off evil. The effect is striking. Faces glow in the lamplight. The jewellery clinks and catches every gesture, and even the youngest girls straighten with pride as the finishing touches go on. You notice the way women trade beauty tips as easily as gossip. How to keep linen soft in the heat, which clay makes the best rouge, and which colour of beads guarantees a compliment from even the most oblivious husbands. One mother gently paints her daughter's lips, pausing to recall her own first festival as a girl, and the thrill of being allowed to wear her mother's earrings for the first time. Historians still argue whether such adornment gave women power or trapped them in cycles of competition and expectation. Some point out that beauty could open doors. Wealthy brides, skilled dancers, and even priestesses often advanced through clever self-presentation. Others suggest that these rituals, while joyful, also reinforced social hierarchies, keeping everyone mindful of their place. What's certain is that adornment was far more than surface depth. Each ornament, each pattern, was a marker of identity, memory, and hope. Quirky tidbit: some Sumerian beauty trends would still raise eyebrows today. For instance, it was fashionable to shape hair into elaborate cones or coils, and for special occasions, women painted their fingertips with henna or coloured clay. There are even references to perfume parties, where women mixed their own signature scents. One of history's earliest forms of DIY beauty influencer culture. You watch as the women file out into the moonlight, their jewellery glinting, their laughter bright. A little girl stops to admire her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, tilting her head and declaring, "Today I am as grand as the Queen of Heaven." The others nod, and her aunt whispers, "That's the spirit." As you leave the gathering, the night air feels alive with possibility. Style, you realise, was never just about looks. It was about staking a claim in the world, expressing joy, asserting status, and passing along secret codes of power and belonging. In Sumer, every bangle, braid, and bold eye was a story, shimmering through time and still waiting to be admired. Night deepens, the world hushed except for the shuffle of sandals and the gentle murmur of prayers floating from open doorways. You follow the flicker of a small lamp, drawn into a home where a Sumerian woman kneels before a humble shrine, a mud brick niche adorned with a figurine, a feather and a bowl of sweet-smelling oil. Here you discover women's faith in its most intimate form, daily spiritual practice, quiet devotion, and the private rituals that shaped the unseen life of the city. You linger by the threshold as the woman bows her head, whispering a prayer for her family's health and the safe return of a husband, still at market.
Mainstream historical fact: while Sumer's public religious life was dominated by grand processions, temple rituals and priesthoods, the majority of spiritual practice took place in the home, often led or maintained by women. Their prayers, offerings, and acts of devotion bridged the ordinary and the divine, ensuring favor, fertility, and protection.
On a low table you spot offerings: a crumb of bread, a splash of beer, a few fresh flowers. The woman lights a small oil lamp, its glow illuminating the painted face of Inanna, goddess of love and war. She sprinkles water over her children's heads, a gesture meant to keep away jealousy and illness, and recites a short hymn passed down from her mother. A quirky tidbit: Sumerian home shrines sometimes included the family's personal gods who watched over lineage, health, and fortune. Families competed to collect the best-looking figurines, with the occasional joke that a handsome idol brought extra luck in marriage and market bargain. You step into the courtyard where another woman tends a potted date palm, humming as she sprinkles water over its leaves. She explains, "Every living thing has a spirit. We honor them, they honor us." Her daughter carefully buries a broken toy at the tree's roots, an offering for better luck next time. At the wall, you notice a painted symbol meant to ward off evil spirits, and a knotted cord over the door for extra insurance. Historians still debate whether women's private devotions carried as much weight as public temple rites, or if the household gods served as a kind of spiritual escape valve, a space for hopes, dreams, and fears unfit for the formal scripts of priests and kings. Some scholars point out that women's prayers and rituals often blended the sacred and the practical, invoking divine aid for everything from good crops to marital harmony, childbirth to lost objects. Others suggest these practices forged a subtle enduring power, one that shaped families, neighborhoods, and quietly, the city itself. A neighbor stops by carrying a fresh-baked loaf and a story about a dream she had, a goddess in a crown of reeds, laughing at a clumsy fisherman. The women trade interpretations. Is it a warning, a blessing, or just the result of too much wine before bedtime? The debate is light-hearted, but meaningful. Each tale, each dream, is folded into the larger quilt of faith growing with every telling. Quirky tidbit: on festival days, women often led the household in cleansing rituals, sweeping out bad luck, hanging new amulets, and washing children's faces with scented water. If a child got fussy, mothers would joke that the house spirit is tickling your nose again. Be nice, or it will hide your shoes. As the night grows late, you witness a quiet ritual of gratitude. A woman kneels with her family, sharing a simple meal, by the flickering lamp. Each person names something they're thankful for: health, rain, a fat lamb, a peaceful night.
The meal ends with a whispered blessing and a promise to remember the gods and honour the ancestors, spoken as much for comfort as belief. Historians still puzzle over the intersection of public and private faith, wondering how much women's rituals influenced broader religious change. Did the home altar serve as a secret laboratory for new prayers, new forms of worship?
Or was it simply a place for solace? A reminder that the divine is as near as the lamp's gentle glow. You leave the home as silence settles, the scent of oil and flowers trailing after you. All across Sumer, in houses rich and poor, women's faith keeps the night steady. A web of hope and gratitude spun softly through every heart and eddy home. There's a drowsy hush over the city now, interrupted only by the occasional dog barking in the distance and the faint whisper of a river reeds outside the walls. You walk the nearly empty lanes, reflecting on everything you've witnessed: the laughter, the bargains, the daily acts of care and rebellion. In these last moments before dawn, you trace the stories of Sumerian women who pushed back against their lot, who refused silence, who left echoes of rebellion and resilience. Even if their names have faded, their courage remains woven into the fabric of forgotten days.
You slip down a narrow alley where rumours linger longer than sunlight. An old woman huddles with two friends, quietly recounting the tale of a daughter who ran away from an unhappy marriage, seeking refuge with a cousin in another city.
Mainstream historical fact. While the law and custom in Sumer favoured obedience and stability, there are scattered hints, legal petitions, gossip in letters, and unexpected mentions in city archives of women pushing boundaries, protesting unfair treatment, or seeking new beginnings by any means possible.
A group of servant girls pause in their work to whisper about a neighbour's clever trick, hiding away barley each week until she could buy her own freedom.
A mother teaches her daughters a song about a woman who changed the ending of her own story, outsmarting an unjust steward and winning her day in a quirky tidbit. One famous Sumerian letter survives from a daughter to her father, complaining vividly about a stepmother's abuse and demanding with remarkable boldness that her father intervene or risk her never sending another letter as long as I live.
The family drama, it seems, was already ancient. Historians still argue whether these tales of resistance are the exception or the hidden rule. Did most women quietly endure, or did they find small ways to challenge and subvert the world's expectation? Some cite the legal cases of women who negotiated better terms in divorce, insisted on property rights, or refused to remarry after being widowed. Others point to oral traditions, stories sung in kitchens or whispered on festival nights, where heroines outwit the gods, rescue siblings, or refuse to bow to kings. You pause to listen at a window, catching the last verse of a lullaby that promises, "If the world forgets your name, let the river remember your courage." In a darkened courtyard, a young woman carves a secret symbol into the corner of a brick, a private rebellion, a prayer for strength, a wish for the next girl to find and know she's not alone. Quirky tidbit. In some neighbourhoods, women created informal sisterhoods, bands of mutual support who met under the guise of chores or celebrations, that shared advice, offered protection, and sometimes plotted small acts of rebellion together. If a member was threatened or unfairly punished, the group might boycott a merchant, send a wave of rumours through the market, or even appeal to a priestess for intervention. You wander through the memories of lost heroines, mothers who stood up to corrupt officials, widows who refused to sell their homes, young women who ran away to start new lives in distant cities. The official records rarely mention these acts, but the stories persist in proverbs, in family tales, and in the stubborn optimism that tomorrow might be different from today. Historians still debate whether to trust these fragments, these whispers. Do they reflect real social change, or are they comforting legends for those left with little else? But you sense, in the steady heartbeat of the city, that every act of defiance, no matter how small, left a mark. Sumerian women's resilience didn't always make history's headlines, but it's there in the gaps and glimmers passed down like a hidden treasure. As the stars fade, you sit beneath a palm, the city's hush pressing close. You remember all the names you never learned, and all the stories unfinished. In summer, as everywhere, the courage to resist, to endure, to hope. These are the true gifts, more enduring than bronze, more valuable than any king's decree. Dawn's first light spreads softly across earth, casting gentle shadows on walls that have witnessed thousands of lives, loves and losses. You wander slowly now, your steps echoing along the silent lanes, every corner alive with the memory of women who shaped the city's fate in ways both subtle and profound. Tonight's long journey draws to a close as you walk through Sumer's enduring legacy, their forgotten stories quietly alive beneath the dust. You linger at a half-crumbled threshold, where a faded handprint marks the entryway. Here, generations of women rose before sunrise to sweep the stones, bless the doorway, and stir the day's first meal. Mainstream historical fact: despite their underrepresentation in the surviving records, Sumerian women's work, creativity, wisdom, and persistence laid foundations for later civilizations in law, literature, religion, and the everyday art of survival. The city is waking. A mother coaxes a toddler out of bed, grandmothers gather to share gossip, a brewer's daughter checks her bubbling vat, and a priestess lights the first lamp of the temple altar. Everywhere you look, the legacy of Sumerian women flickers, braided in the shape of a loaf, hidden in a prayer, preserved in a lullaby. The rituals and resilience of these women live on in places their names could not. You pass a field where an old woman stoops to press seeds into the earth, murmuring a blessing she learned from her grandmother. Each gesture is a thread, spun from the stories and wisdom of those who came before. The child practices writing in the dirt, her mother offering gentle correction and encouragement. These quiet acts, repeated for centuries, form the backbone of history, even when the chroniclers forget to record them. Quirky tidbit: on New Year's Day, some families still tell tales of the clever daughter or the brave midwife from the old times. Stories meant to bring luck and remind children that courage and wisdom are not the sole property of kings. Even today, the shadow of Sumerian women lingers in customs, superstitions, and the gentle humour passed from mother to daughter. You notice, as the sun climbs, how every piece of the city, every stone garden and melody holds echoes of those whose hands shaped them. In Sumer, as in every civilization, women's contributions are often overlooked, yet they endure in the foundation of law, the poetry of love, the rituals of faith, and the rhythm of daily life. Historians still debate how much of Sumer's greatness can be traced to the invisible work of women. Was their influence as wide as it sometimes appears in rare records? Or was it confined to the quiet world of home? The debate continues, but as you watch a young woman braid her daughter's hair and whisper a morning blessing, you realize the truest legacy is the one lived, not written. The resilience, kindness, and cleverness carried forward, always, as the city brightens and the world stirs to new stories. You pause to honor the forgotten, the silent, and the enduring. In the dust and the dawn, you feel the comfort of all those lives, remembered and unremembered, stretching gently into your own. Let the last traces of ancient fall gently away, each detail softened by the spreading warmth of daylight. The lanes grow quieter still as families settle into their mourning, the distant hum of city life fading into a peaceful hush. Let your breath slow, chest rising and falling in time with the memories of Sumer's grandmothers, priestesses, mothers and daughters, those voices now woven quietly into your dreams. Picture yourself wrapped in the cool shade of a garden, the faint perfume of figs and dates drifting on a slow breeze. the laughter of children, the steady voice of an elder sharing a story, the gentle clink of bangles, all dissolve into the softest background music. You're safe here, watched over by centuries of wisdom and love, lulled by rituals older than any written word. Let your mind drift from scene to scene, unhurried and gentle, following the thread of comfort left behind by every woman who shaped her world in ways big and small. As you rest, the dust settles, and the first birds begin to sing. The old worries and unanswered questions slip away with the night. You carry with you the resilience of Sumerian women, their laughter, their secret strength, and the hope they planted for a future they would never see. Every breath brings deeper calm. Every memory settles into a soothing hush. Allow sleep to come softly as dawn brightens the horizon. The story isn't over. These lives remembered and forgotten are with you still, keeping watch as you drift further into peace, wrapped in the gentle warmth of their legacy.